Well, Erwin McManus, it is an absolute pleasure to have you on our Undistracted podcast. Thank you for your time today.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. I don't know if I qualify to be undistracted.
Hopefully inspiring us to be at least a little bit more. But your new book, Mind Shift, you don't have to be a genius to think like one, or it doesn't take a genius to think like one. Let's start with that idea of what genius level thinking looks like. How is it different from ordinary thinking?
Just like there are Olympic athletes, like a Michael Phelps, or there might be someone who's the best in the world. We can all be swimmers, but maybe we're not all Michael Phelps, right? We can all play basketball, but maybe we're not all Steph Curry. And so I just want to give that disclaimer. This book will not make you Picasso, and it's not going to make you Leonardo da Vinci, but it will help you begin to awaken your own personal genius. And so I think of the human experience on a spectrum. I remember one time I walked into a Nike store, and there was a giant sign that said, "If you have a body, you are an athlete." And I thought, well, I don't know, and, sometimes my body has not reflected an athletic potential. And yet what it should say is, if you have a body, you have the potential to be athletic or to be healthy. And I think the same way in terms of genius. Like this is not a promise that you're going to be Picasso, but it is a promise that you can elevate your thinking, and it will elevate your life if you can destroy the internal limitations that are completely connected to your mindset. It will awaken in you a life so extraordinary that it'll feel like genius.
What would it look like to be fully alive, to be operating in your own personal level of genius thinking?
Well, I don't know how it looks like for everyone else, because I think it's unique to each person. But I know for me, what it does is I have a deep sense that I'm connected to the person I am created to become, that I'm accessing the deepest level of my essence, my talent, my passion, my genius, and that I'm able to translate that into real life. I think one of the great frustrations in life is when the idea of who you are supposed to be and the idea of who you are so far apart that it creates the space for depression, despair, a deep sense of disappointment, anxiety, stress.
Yeah.
And I think a huge part of our emotional well-being is connected to us becoming the person that we intuitively know we have the potential of being.
Is our thinking, in your mind, then the key thing that really stops us getting to that potential, realizing that version of ourselves we want to become and should become, really?
I wouldn't say necessarily our thinking only, because I think this is the caveat. In my mind, thinking is directly connected to action.
Mm.
So a person can contemplate all their life and never change. But if you change your thinking and it genuinely changes your mental construct of reality, then it will change your actions, and then it will, without question, change you and change your life.
And how did you reach this point where you saw the mind as the place to begin for transformation? There's so many programs and this many step ideas, etc., that
Yeah.
say this will change your life. Why for you is the mind the place to start?
I'm from a small country called El Salvador. Spanish was my first language. I was raised in the first years of my life by my grandparents. And my grandfather taught me how to play chess from the age of 3. And I learned at an early age, the choices you make affect your future. And my grandfather was ruthless in his competition. So he would never let me have a move. He would checkmate me in 10 moves, 11 moves, 12 moves. He would checkmate me as fast as he could. And it would be devastating for me. I'm 3, I'm 4, I'm 5 years old. I spent most of my life, childhood, losing every single match, because I'm playing my grandfather and my older brother. So there's no chance for me to win for a long time. And I remember crying and saying to my grandfather, "Let me have a move." And he said, "When you earn a move, you can have a move." And so early on, I had this mental framework that the most powerful thing a human being does is to choose. And then I became, 20 years later, a person of faith. And somehow I felt that this was lost in the narrative. And so we would have on our wall in our house this statement: the most spiritual thing you will ever do today is to choose. And so that's like the backdrop of why I believe in mental structures and the power of your mindset. But I also want to like fast forward that. I've worked with thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands, and I work with people in extreme poverty. I spent many years working with the urban poor, with people trapped in poverty, with drug cartels. I've also been the mental performance coach for billionaires, the top people in sports, in music, in fashion, and so I've dealt with the whole spectrum of
Mm.
human, engagement. And one of the things I just began to see over and over again is that the differential between a person living their optimal life, because I don't think you should compare your life to anyone else.
Yeah.
It's really about living your own optimal life, is their understanding of internal narratives and external narratives. And that's why in the book, there's one page and it just has one sentence. And it says, the intention of this book is to destroy internal limitations. And that's the entire purpose of Mind Shift. I can't change your circumstances. I wish I could. You may be in great environments or terrible environments. You may have all the opportunities in the world or very, very limited opportunities. And unfortunately, no one can write a book and change any of those. But what I can do is I can give you the internal tools to take on whatever challenges, whatever circumstance, whatever life you're facing, and have your own personal optimal result.
Mm. It's so good to, I think, clarify that expectation as well and just say to people, hey, you may not be able to change where you came from, but you can change where you're going to go. And I saw that recently you got to take this message, this concept of mind shift to the president of El Salvador. How did that feel, having started, your early days in one respect in the difficulty of that, to go through everything you have up until this point and then present this message in your home country? How did that feel?
First of all, I'm amazed that you know. That's awesome. And that means you're traveling with us through our life experience. So that's awesome. And that day was a perfect construction of a life. That morning after we got up, we drove to the house where I grew up in. And the very house where I, lived from my first day, I think, of life.
Hmm.
And all my early memories were in this house in 113 Calle San Salvador. And we got to go meet the family who owns the house now. And they took us through the house, and they knew my family. They knew my grandfather, my uncles, my aunts. They knew my mom.
Wow.
And Mariah, my daughter, we just sat together on a curbside and took a photograph together on the street where I used to play, walked to the park across the street where I played as a little kid, whenever it was safe enough to go outside.
Yeah.
And that's how my day began. And then that evening, I had an opportunity to have a meeting with President Nayib Bukele, who has transformed the country. And for anyone who hasn't followed what's going on in El Salvador, my country has been the leader of global homicides.
Mm.
And there's no nation in the world that had a more violent murder rate than El Salvador. And it's been true for years and years and years. And so El Salvador has an infamy. The most violent street gangs in the world are led by Salvadorians. MS-13 and the 18th Street gang are two of the most notorious violent gangs on the planet. And the country was overrun by 70,000 terrorists, 70,000 gang members who held the nation captive. You could not run a store. You could not have an operation without having to pay money to them for protection. It's like those old gangster movies that you watch. The entire country was held under siege by these 70,000 gang members. And Nayib Bukele became president at 37 and decided to go to war against corruption and terrorism. And in 4 years, transformed the country from the most violent country in the world to the most peaceful country in all Central America. Hmm. And when we had 1 day without a murder, we celebrated. To have 365 days was unbelievable. And they basically get up and they guarantee any tourist safety. You can walk down any street in El Salvador and you are safe.
Wow.
And so for me to get to meet with him was pretty extraordinary. I've been following his story. He gets a lot of bad global press because people do not understand what it takes to go to war against terrorism and what it takes to transform a nation. And he's 41 now, maybe 42. And and has given El Salvador an incredible future. So it was
Yeah.
really incredible to be able to sit down with them, have a long conversation, to give them a copy of Mind Shift and talk to them about the future of El Salvador. And yeah, it was an incredible privilege. It
Yeah.
was a bucket list that I didn't even know I had a bucket for.
Yeah, and to think that he did that within, a 4-year window as well, like, that's a remarkable trait to not just change something, but change it relatively quickly. Did you gain any insights around that? That can be, I suppose, applied in different contexts too, but that ability to change at scale, but also at a pace that actually means lives change more immediately.
There was, and we had a fantastic conversation. And some of the like keen insights this is kind of going to be ironic for some people, but he's his father, if I remember correctly, his father's a doctor and an imam, and his grandfather, I believe it was, um, planted the first mosque in El Salvador. They are 100% Palestinian. So interesting in the middle of this
Mm,
Palestinian-Israeli, crisis. And so his family's from another country, but he was born in El Salvador. And in his journey came to a deep personal faith. And so it was unexpected. People didn't realize it, that he had a personal faith in Jesus Christ. And that for him, from his explanation, has been the critical moral compass of his life. That one, he said, we couldn't have done this without a lot of miraculous things happening.
mm,
We cannot explain why 70,000 gang members didn't just go to war against us and kill 70,000 of us in one day. We can't explain why the most violent gangs in the world suddenly were afraid and were running for their lives. We can't explain why one gang didn't realize when we were going after them, after the other gang, that we would come after them. There was like almost an unexpected blindness that the criminal element of the nation had during that process. So many, and he said, we were terrified the day we were going to go after the gangs,
mm,
because here we already had, I think it says something like 86 murders in a weekend, 64 in a day. And they were already leading the world in the homicide rate. He said, if we go after these gangs and they all just killed one person, there'd be 70,000 people killed in a day.
mm,
He said, the overwhelming weight of the potential negative outcome of violence and death was terrifying. And so the level of moral courage that they had to step into to believe that good could prevail over evil was pretty incredible. And
mm,
and I think all of us face intersections in our lives where we face what the seemingly impossible. And we have to make decisions based on what are we convinced will create the most good in the
mm,
world.
mm.
And that was to me a pretty epic moment in our conversation.
Yeah, it's a really special insight. And in Mindshift, you yourself credit the life of Jesus with being a key anchor, a key example of how you've come to all of these different conclusions about thinking about mental transformation. What have you observed in the life of Jesus that has really inspired your journey into the concepts within Mindshift?
It really is one of the reasons I have so proactively and publicly gone into the business space. I always did it privately, but in the last few years, I just decided to go public. This is what I do. And it's because I want people to realize that the highest level of thinking actually does come from the scriptures and comes from the person of Jesus. There's such a beautiful, I think, resurrection of the teachings of the Stoics. I was incredibly influenced by the Stoics. I read everything that Socrates, well, he didn't really ever write anything, but everything that was ever written
Mm,
about Socrates, everything that was ever written down that he said, everything Plato wrote, Aristotle. I was influenced dramatically by Marcus Aurelius and by the Stoics. And before I ever even knew who Jesus was, I was already shaped, and I called myself a Socratic. And so I actually love the fact that Socratic thought has found its way back um, into the modern conversation. I don't think it's an enemy of my thinking.
mm,
And a lot of times we're so either or no, we're either us or against us. And I actually think wisdom should be valued from any source, and as long as it's wisdom.
mm,
And but I don't I think that there are writers today who really in the public domain really advocate the thinking of Marcus Aurelius, really advocate the thinking of Aristotle, but no one is really advocating the thinking of Jesus. I mean, we preach about him in the church, but that becomes irrelevant to the conversation about wisdom and insight, strategic thinking, and living life in a principled way. And so I wanted to say, hey, look, because I have a lot of people that that I have influence in their life, and who come to me for insight and wisdom, and I want them to know, if you value this level of thinking and this level of wisdom, I want you to know what my source is.
Mm.
My source is that my thinking has been shaped by Jesus by a number of things. Chapter 1 in Mindshift is it's all about people. And that for me, that comes directly from the principles of Jesus. And, that, you're to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And when you understand that everything is about people, that people are the economy of God, it changes your entire construct of what success is.
Mm.
And whether you're trying to achieve great wealth, which I'm actually for, and if you're trying to gain power for good, I'm actually for good people having power. If you're trying to, achieve fame or prestige or whatever it may be, I'm not against those things. And what I am trying to help a person realize is that those are incredible outcomes, but they're terrible intentions.
Mm. Yeah.
And and the reason people end up empty and broken and disillusioned is that they chose extraordinary outcomes that are terrible intentions. And so if you can choose the right intentions, you have the internal structure to handle extraordinary outcomes. And these are things I learned from Jesus, and by the way, not just from Jesus, but from the principles in the Old Testament that I think are actually some of the greatest pieces of literature on human wisdom, on how to live a life that's really full and rich and whole. And I just love taking those principles and giving them to the world.
Yeah, and your previous book, The Genius of Jesus, is a great
Yeah.
one for people to check out if they want to go down that, subject a little bit more. But coming back to something you mentioned about wisdom being able to be drawn from whatever source, so long as it's wisdom, how do we know whether something is wise or whether it's not?
Yeah, I think there's a good simple rule. If it makes you better and the world better, it's wisdom. If it's good for you but bad for others, it's foolishness.
Mm.
And we don't usually choose things that are bad for us and bad for others, although we do, we just think that bad things are good for us because we don't have a proper perspective on reality. But most of the time, we're choosing things that we think are good for us, even if it's good pleasure, it's good temporarily, it's good for the moment, it's good for now. It may eat away my future, but it's good for this moment, right? And but the problem is that when you think that when you have a limited resource mentality and you believe that it can only be good for you if it's bad for others, you can only gain if someone else loses.
Mm.
And I think that the extraordinary mental shift that the scriptures give us is that when someone else wins, you don't lose. When someone else has more, you've lost nothing. And if you can actually celebrate someone else's success and celebrate someone else's prosperity, if you can celebrate someone else's life, it actually enhances yours and postures you to be able to receive and accept more in your own life.
And the people that we surround ourselves with have a huge impact on the experience we have, but also that we give them. When we look at the life of Jesus, right? Somebody who was as elevated as you can be in his personal life as God, right? He, I imagine, chose the 12, the people that he surrounded himself with really intentionally. For somebody like him, when you look through that lens of, you're the sum of your closest five friends, for instance, why do you think Jesus specifically chose this ramshackle, messy, sometimes deceitful group of people?
Yeah, there's no way around it. No matter who Jesus picked, he would be stepping down. you know, so there's no social group that Jesus is going to pull together to go, oh, now I've got, a group of people that are going to really pull me up, which is exactly why I think Jesus did what he did. If he had surrounded himself with 5 kings, they would have said, oh, the kings gave him power.
Hmm.
Or if he'd surrounded himself with 5 billionaires, they would have said, oh, well, that's why he succeeded. Or if he, surrounded himself with 5 of the wisest scholars of the Torah, then he would go, oh, it's because he had the wisest men with him. I think Jesus picked his 12 because he wanted people to understand that God can use the most ordinary, simple material to do extraordinary, beautiful things. And I think that's just, it's the blank canvas. Would you know it's a Picasso if he's painting over a Monet? The one thing they all had in common was that they all started with a blank canvas. I think Jesus picked 12 people that not only looked like blank canvases, but maybe they looked like damaged canvases. And Jesus took damaged canvases and showed that beautiful lives could be created from that material.
Mm. And touching on a side of what you do bring in mind shift, this human dilemma, that was what Jesus was right up against. And in one respect, bringing intention to the point you make about forgiveness and how significant that is, right? Like if you're going to be living alongside humans, forgiveness, as you put it, is one of the greatest skills we're going to have to learn.
Yeah, humans are a mess. It's like, life would be so easy without them. and, but then who would we have on a podcast? you know, so, it's like the best things in life come from humans and the worst things in life come from humans. And every moment of celebration in our life really has deepest value because there are people there. And every moment in life we wish we never experienced, it's because a human was there, And so some of it is just understand that humanity doesn't work without forgiveness. And I always thought this was kind of an interesting thing. I like studying other species and trying to understand the correlation between humans and wolves, or humans and porpoises, or whatever it may be. And one of the things I find interesting is that I don't know if any other species forgives. I think we're the only species that has this particular ritual. And I always wonder, like, what was it in our mental construct that allowed the whole concept of forgiveness to
Mm.
exist? Because it's actually a very complex process. Because when someone hurts you or betrays you and you actually forgive them, you don't forget.
Mm.
So forgiveness doesn't have to do with memory reorientation. And you don't necessarily even trust that person again. In fact, the wisest people understand that forgiveness and trust are not the same thing, and they're not connected, that forgiveness should be immediate and trust should take time. And that's where we get confused sometimes. But think about this incredible thing, that if we did not forgive as human beings, we would not be capable of having human community. Marriages wouldn't exist. They almost don't.
Mm.
And parenting wouldn't exist. And the truth of the matter is that you can't have deep, meaningful relationships without forgiveness. So forgiveness really is the lubricant of human relationships. If you don't forgive much, you do not have intimate friendships and
Mhm.
relationships. If you forgive a lot, and if you easily forgive, you have so many friends you can't even count them all.
In that act of forgiveness, or even in some of the other concepts you bring within Mindshift, there's got to be an ability for us to change our mind, whether that's to change our opinion about a person, to change our behavior toward them, to change the way we think. This concept of changing your mind, how do we
Mhm.
do that? Like, not necessarily alter our mind specifically, but change the way we think, change the perspectives and conclusions that we come to. How do we do that?
Well, first of all, it's amazing that humans can change the way they think, just being an observer of humans. And, it's amazing. One of the narratives you see on film and television a lot is whether people can change or not. There's so often a character in a film that says people don't change. And you hear that a lot. And it's funny because when my wife and I watch those and someone says people don't change, she'll go, yeah, they don't change. Like, Kim is like a people don't change person. And I'm like, people are changing all the time person.
Mm.
People are always changing, just not always for the better. You know, if you want proof that everyone can change, watch how bad people can become.
Yeah.
You just keep changing, and you didn't start bad. You didn't start that bad. You just let yourself keep making bad choices, and
Mm.
it made you the worst version of yourself. Well, if people can change, you become a worse version of themselves, and people can change, you become a better version of themselves.
Mm.
And one of the things that I talk about in Mind Shift in part is that your brain knows when you're lying. and like your friends know when you're lying, but they don't tell you. But your brain really knows when you're lying. Like when you say, I'm going to lose weight, your brain goes, yeah, you're lying. I'm going to start exercising, every day. And you're like, your brain goes, you're just lying through your teeth. I was like, and so your brain, you should know that your brain is very cynical. Your brain is not your friend. And, your brain is very cynical. It doesn't believe you when you say you want to change. It doesn't believe you when you say you're going to change. It doesn't believe you when you say you've changed your mind. The only thing that convinces the brain is action. So the only thing that will change your mind is action. And so when you say, I'm going to start working out, your brain doesn't believe you. When you start working out, your brain goes, whoa, what's going on? You're different. And then you show up again, and you show up again, and you show up again. And also your brain goes, wait a minute, I don't think you're doing something new. I think you are something new. And so when people say it takes whatever, 40 days, 90 days, the numbers always change on me. How many days does it take to actually establish a habit? What's really happening, and I don't know if people really understand this, is that it takes that long for your brain to be convinced you're not doing something different. You are something different. And the moment your brain is convinced that you are something different, guess what? You are something different.
Right. So in a sense, our actions lead our mind in one respect.
Yeah. So you have to decide to change and realize that decision doesn't exist until you act.
That's a good thing. That's a really good insight. And I appreciate you articulating it in that way. And I know that in the way that you've lived your life and those that observe your life, they see that you have this real capacity, not to just teach, but also to learn. You're really good at learning and embracing this idea that we learn something new every day and beyond that. If you were to give us an insight into how to learn, what would that be to become better at that?
First of all, thank you for such a great compliment. I love that. I love that you can see that I love to learn and that I'm actually still capable of learning. It's crazy. I'm 65 years old and I feel like a novice. I mean, I feel like a beginner, and I have all the joy of being new and of learning and starting from scratch. And so one of the chapters in Mind Shift is no one knows what they're doing. And
We don't.
and here's a thing I didn't write in the book that I can add to that chapter. The moment you know what to do, you're old. Because the moment you know what to do and no one can teach you, you've rigidified. And that's when you're incapable of changing and growing. And so I still don't know what I'm doing. And I'm just starting from scratch, and there are a lot of things I actually know now that life has taught me. So it's not that you don't know anything.
Yeah.
But let me tell you, when I was in my 20s, I knew a lot more.
Oh, we thought we knew a lot more, right?
Yeah. I just knew so much, and life beat that out of me. And and now I know so little, but what I know, and I know deeply and profoundly. But I also know that knowing is dynamic. And even when you know something, you keep growing. I mean, we talk about I've been married for 40 years, and do I know Kim? Like, I know Kim, but I don't know if I know Kim. When people say, well, I just got tired of my wife, I'm like, you got divorced and remarried because you wanted to be married to a different woman. Like, I've been married for 40 years and I've been married to a different woman for like 40 different times. I mean, she just keeps changing on me. You just have to give people time to change. And I know Kim, but I also know I don't know her. And the moment I think I know everything about her, our marriage probably becomes stale. But every day when I believe there's something new to learn about her and something new to appreciate, that's when something is really dynamic and beautiful. And I think it's true in everything in life. As long as you have this deep sense of there's just so much to learn, it makes life so exciting.
One thing I always wonder about learning, though, is why we seem to learn the things after we need to know them, right? Like you live a particular way and then you learn, oh my gosh, I was doing that all wrong, or I wish I knew that then. Like, why do we learn in that order where it's almost like we learn the thing after it would have been helpful to know the thing so that we didn't make the mistakes?
Yeah, there is the science of what's called adult pedagogy, of how adults learn. And I think the technical reason for why we don't learn till after, it's called stupidity. Because uh, adults only learn in crisis. It's a crazy thing, but you don't really become open to learning until you realize I need to learn this.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, it's why most people only go to marriage counseling after the marriage has already fallen apart. Nobody goes to therapy going, I'm doing great. you know, I just sound like I'm running on all cylinders. I have incredible mental health. I think I should go check it out.
Mm.
And we only go when everything's falling apart. I work as an advisor for a lot of businesses and CEOs, and they never come to me when they're crushing. They're coming to me when they're crushed.
Yeah.
And in fact, one person just told me point blank. He had the most successful season in his career. And he said, I would have never been open to you after my massive wins.
Hmm.
It's only when I had the worst season of my life that I became really open to, I needed like a mindset coach. And so the reason we don't learn until after is because we think we already know. It's that arrogance of I know, and I don't know that I don't know.
Hmm.
And that's why it's so much better to posture yourself going, I think I know this area. I think I know this, but I should probably take on the posture of I don't know something that I need to know.
Hmm.
And I've got to learn it. And when you do that, it changes everything. I mean, I was in this business event and one person said, I can only learn when I hit the bottom. And the next day I came back and said, that's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard. It's like you can learn at least on the way down in the middle.
Yeah.
you know, it's like, and I know, stay with me. You can learn when you're at the top. It's all about a posture. It's just, the question is not, can you only learn at the bottom? The question is, can you posture yourself to learn before you hit the bottom? That same posture that people learn from at the bottom is available the entire way.
In the world of faith, you touch on two things. In one of the sermons that you did about the concepts in mind shift, you said that when you come into the world of faith, it was almost like you were taught that you didn't need your mind anymore, that was going to be set aside, that you didn't have to make any kind of choices. What do you think the role of the mind is meant to be alongside faith? Because in your opinion, they're not meant to be detached.
No, they're not. And I think they are detached, unfortunately, and we need brain surgery. And that's really desperate. And yeah, I think there's a lot of things connected to it. And it's a false view of how faith works. And that when we give our life, to Jesus and we come to believe in God, that now God just inputs and tells us what to do. So we don't have to think anymore. We don't have to choose anymore. We just need to obey. And it's that language of obedience. And by the way, it's not just common to Christianity. I mean, it's interesting because, Islam is the word Islam, and I think this is correct. It actually means submit. And now people say it means peace, but it doesn't mean peace. And it means submit. It's like this idea: God's God, you're human, you do what God tells you. Period.
Hmm.
Not that different than a lot of Christianity, right? So it's like it's the same concept. And so what ends up happening is you end up developing this passive view of life, where you don't do anything until you're sure it's God.
Hmm.
But except everything else, you get up and you brush your teeth. You don't wait for a divine mandate. You take a shower every day, ideally, but you don't wait for God, do I take a shower today? Like, if we really play this out all the way through, we'd be paralyzed. We could not do anything until we heard this voice that tells us, get out of bed. I mean, I don't even know how you get dressed. God, do I wear this shirt or these pants? Do I wear blue or brown? And if you take this to the ridiculous end, you realize that's not the way you're designed by God.
Mm.
That God actually designed you with agency, the ability to think, to choose, and to create. And that's actually how God is, if I could use this language, how he's glorified, by you choosing and acting and creating. And that he designed you like that. It's not you stepping outside of God's parameters or his sovereignty. It's you living inside beautifully in that. And I think a lot of sincere people just use language like, if God wants it to happen, it's going to happen. I'm going, where did you get that?
Hmm.
Like, and how about like be courageous and fight, and how about be bold and go forward? And so a lot of our language becomes incredibly passive language, wait on the Lord, except the only place in the Bible where it says wait on the Lord is when they were going to turn back, not when they were going forward. And I don't think God's going, you're going too fast. You just have too much courage. You just have too much faith. I can't keep up with you. Wait on me. It's the other way around. It's when we're terrified and we're afraid of the future and the challenges look too big and we think we're going back. That's when God goes, wait. When you need to wait on God is when you don't have the courage to go forward.
And it would be strange for him to give us free choice and free will, which a lot of people talk about. Like it's well known that there is an aspect of free will within the dialogue of faith and Christianity. So it'd be strange for him to say, have it, but don't use it. Don't do anything with it. Don't explore that.
Yeah, this is how you prove that you are faithful. Don't think. Don't choose. Don't act. And I just really, I guess I'm on a mission to reconnect the essence of spirituality with the power of human thought. And, I think for a long time, it's like our faith was connected to our moral choices. And I'm going, it doesn't take that much genius to make good moral choices. You just have to stop being dumb.
So simply put, right?
You just have to stop being stupid. And then when you're finally deciding between good and extraordinary, that's when you have to see the nuances. That's when you really need the insights for life. I don't think God needs to help me think through, do I rob a bank or do I, build a house for a homeless person, And I think most of the time we can make really good decisions if we just move toward the good. And that's the incredible freedom that we have. And then you go, okay, God, you've created me in such a unique way that you've given me the power to create through the choices I make. So I want to make the kind of choices that reflect your character, your heart. And if you need to redirect me, I'm here. Just redirect me. I think it's much easier to redirect someone who's moving forward to do good than someone who's sitting around paralyzed, afraid to do anything.
It's been such a privilege to hear so much more of your ideas and your heart around this, Erwin. I want to know, for people who are going to read Mindset, who are going to want to apply this, what do you think the world would look like if we all embraced a positive mind shift? What would the world look like?
It's interesting talking about what would the world look like if mind shift actually was implemented when we're in the middle of this Israeli-Palestinian Middle Eastern crisis, because what we all know is that that's not how the world's supposed to look. No matter where we stand, and whether you're pro-Israel, pro-Palestine, or pro-humanity, or or don't even know because it's so complicated. You just know that senseless killing is not who we're supposed to be. We can look at things in the world and know this isn't the way it's supposed to be. I mean, imagine just if the Middle East took on just chapter 1. It's all about people, but it's not just all about my people. It's not just all about me. It's not just about the people who believe what I believe or who have the same blood that I have or ethnicity that I have. But it's all about people. Then it reframes everything, because you have to begin to think through the future with people as the highest value. People are more valuable than land. People are more valuable than territory. People are more valuable than boundaries and borders. And when we start thinking, okay, how do we do this in a way that's the most humane way? It's the hardest level of thinking, but it's the most elevated level of thinking.
Erwin, thank you so much for sharing some of your genius and the work that you've done on shifting your mind with us today. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for having me. And hopefully we'll make it down under soon and get to enjoy the Australian people and weather.
Absolutely. We will look forward to it, Erwin. Again, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you. Take care.